It's funny. I can't actually remember the last time you were the one risking something. And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to Ex-Women.
In recent history, movie studios have become more and more reliant on nostalgia to make money. They often take what has been done in comics and tried on television, and then translate it onto the big screen. Some won't even look to other mediums, simply remaking movies that have happened in the past. While these days, most people think of Disney when you talk about remakes, reusing nostalgia isn't anything new. The Aliens franchise, Fantastic Four, Ghostbusters, Star Trek, and more have done it long before Disney became synonymous with retelling. And with audiences becoming accustomed to reboots, dare I say bored, studio execs are scrambling to try to bring people in. And when we see everything from retellings to lies that the new movies are consistent with what we've seen before, and even outright changing things from the ethnicities to the backgrounds of characters, have the studios gone too far? With the need to mix things up and ensure sales continue to grow, inevitably the characters and who they were previously will be on the chopping block. While there are many examples, I personally find it intriguing to analyze Professor Xavier from the movie Dark Phoenix and the MJ from Far From Home. Before we break down the key components of the characters, I want to say that I don't think any of this is reflective of the actors themselves. James McAvoy has shown his acting chops in portraying Professor Xavier really well historically. From a caring mentor that wants to help and care for mutants and normalize being different to being a powerful threat when pushed too far. Hell, he can be so intimidating that even Magneto knows not to cross that red line sometimes. And Zendaya has been in several different movies that shows she really knows how to portray sympathetic and strong characters as well. So removing the persons from the writing, why do I find one character, arguably the stereotypical character that is staying closer to the source material, to be wildly more insulting than the character that has been changed in almost every way, including even her name? Well, it's really easy. It's the spirit of the character. Before we get into it, let me note, there will be very mild spoilers for Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home. Nothing that will hurt the movies though, so don't worry. There are some major spoilers for Dark Phoenix, but let's be honest, why do you even care if you're going to go see that one or not? Anyway, looking at Dark Phoenix, Professor Xavier is so wildly different from what we have seen historically, it's pathetic. Not only is he inconsistent with the past, but the movement of him from being a caring mentor to a selfish jerk is never explained. Let's break it down. Often in story writing, characters are identified by their level of social interaction. The level of character evolution is a powerful writing tool. For an in-depth analysis, you should check out The Heart of the Film by Cynthia Whitcomb. But to put it in short, there are 5 levels to a character. Arguably 6, there is a level 0, but I'm just not going to get into that. Generally, the levels will go from 1 to 5. A character who's at a level 1 is a loner who either can't find a way to interact with others or doesn't want to, and a level 5 is a character who is someone who is sociable to a fault, focused on the group dynamics and more concerned with keeping the group happy and thriving than their own personal needs. This is often associated with spirituality and a need to save humanity above all else. And it's not necessarily a positive trait to be a level 5. Someone who is at this level is as likely to be unrelatable and can make as bad decisions as a level 1 character. In my opinion, we have seen Xavier in the movies and comics as a level 4. He cares deeply about all mutants and even humans. He wants to find a way to bridge the gap between the two groups and make our species better. He protects his X-Men, but will put himself and even his team at risk trying to find a way to save everyone. This is not the Xavier we see in Dark Phoenix. He is definitively a selfish and egotistical level 1 archetype. He is so focused on getting medals and trying to keep the perception of mutants being just the awesome sauce in front of humanity that he ultimately can't see the forest for the trees. He doesn't care about the X-Men, humanity, nor normalization of people who are different. Not really. He is so focused on the goal of not being persecuted that the reason why he doesn't want to be doesn't matter anymore. Not only is this a step away from the core concepts of the fracking character, but we, the viewers, cannot easily relate to someone that has so drastically changed. It is possible to write an arc where a level 4 character, someone caring like Xavier, falls from grace and becomes a level 1. Hell, it could have been really interesting to see it in this movie or perhaps throughout several movies. To see him go from fighting for humanity to just fighting for a cause he doesn't even believe in anymore, to being someone who just enjoys being the hero. Honestly, it would have been interesting to see the arc similar to what we see with Walter White in Breaking Bad. Walter goes from being a lovable teacher, arguably a level 3 or level 4 archetype, to a drug-dealing character, definitively level 1. Possibly level 2 with some people, but that's an argument for another time and gets deeper into character evolution. We're just gonna go with level 1 for now. But that's the entire problem with all of this. The audience is generally going to be humans, and as humans, when we watch Walter, we watch him fall level to level. We see him going from being a teacher and someone who cares about his family slowly down to someone who only cares about individual relationships to someone that only cares about himself. Again, arguably. This shows that characters who change wildly can be written well. It is possible to write a story where people can understand and relate. Unfortunately, the writing is so poor in Dark Phoenix that the transition is either not there or it's so vague it's hard to relate to. The Xavier in Dark Phoenix is so totally different from what we know him as, it's just embarrassing to see it on screen. Different and artistic change is good, but not this. This is just an attempt to denigrate one character at the expense of another. We'll get into that later.
You look really pretty.
And therefore I have value?
No, that's not what I meant.
I'm messing with you.
So after talking about how much I hate Xavier, I'm sure you are looking forward to me eviscerating MJ from Far From Home. Actually, I kinda like the character. First, we don't have the exact same problems that we have with the Professor. MJ isn't a stand-in or a replacement, but a different take on the character herself. She's not the Mary Jane we know, true, but she's also not wildly different. The writer takes the core concepts of Mary Jane and then they tell her story from a different angle. I've talked about how I find the MCU Spider-Man to be incredibly boring and predictable. MJ is probably one of the few exceptions to that stance. First, let's analyze Mary Jane as a character. Not her looks nor even technical attributes, but the core concepts of who she is. Admittedly, Mary Jane was originally conceived as a love interest and woman as a reward trope for Peter Parker. However, I think even older Spider-Man movies try to shift the dynamic to something more complicated. Mary Jane is a love interest of Spider-Man in all iterations. Sure, she's also a level 2 character that is focused on relationships and interpersonal interactions. She's able to show Peter different aspects of himself and even can be smarter than he is in some aspects. She builds him up and helps him succeed. She is one of the most vital aspects of his life as her out-of-the-box perspective provides him with guidance and views he can't see himself. But not only does she do well with Peter Parker, but everyone she comes into contact with is generally a better person because of it. This is what, in my opinion, MJ has been established as historically. So let's look at Far From Home's iteration. The character is an African-American girl that is beautiful, socially awkward, prefers the macabre, and intelligent. She has a fascination with both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Given that we see it in the trailer, I'm not worried to tell you this, she even figures out that he is Spider-Man. Her interactions with her own friends, Peter's friends, and the teachers also shows that she is charismatic and liked despite any awkwardness she has. Both Mary Jane of old and MJ here are level 2 characters. They are smart, intelligent, and out-of-the-box thinkers. However, the writers decided to take a risk and see what if MJ was different. Not just her ethnicity, but what she likes and enjoys. Hell, I would say societally, this MJ is more relatable than the Mary Jane we see in the comic books. I think that MJ works because they tried something new that is not at the expense of the other characters and, I hate to keep repeating myself, keeps the core concepts. And hell, let's look at other characters in Dark Phoenix. One of the characters that also doesn't work is Sophie Turner's Jean Grey. And why I think that is, among other things, she takes from the character of Xavier. The focus on Jean, not to mention a few core changes to her character's concept, forces a change in the Xavier character to make the story work. Professor Xavier suffers at the expense of Jean. He wasn't enhanced by the storytelling. This isn't what we see with MJ in Far From Home. Now generally, I do argue that you can make changes to a character's looks, ethnicity, and dynamics if you keep who they are. Taking a chance and retelling a story with differences is what makes our culture great. But to be clear and to address it, this is not always acceptable. Sometimes, who the character is involves their ancestry and their ethnicity. Black Panther's concept is a strong African-American character, Jessica Jones as a down-on-her-luck female, and Fish Out of Water White male Iron Fist all have core concepts in the color of their skin or sex that, if removed, changes the character so drastically as to not be that story anymore. So when people get upset because of changes like this, it's not necessarily untoward, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But we have to look at what makes the character before we get bent out of shape. I'm sure some will disagree with that, and that's a video for another time. Ultimately, the discussion comes to changing a character and how it can be done without insulting the original work. I sincerely believe that MJ in Far From Home is a far cry better than what Xavier is in Dark Phoenix. And even if we remove the comparison, MJ is a breath of fresh air in an otherwise stale tale as old as time. But those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below.